Hello everyone and welcome back to Be Here Now. Now today I'm going to be looking at the lost history of Manchester City Football Club. One of the superpowers of English football today, certainly one of the most successful in recent years. They're also one of the wealthiest, having invested over £1 billion since they were taken over a few years ago by one of the richest royal families in the world. And they live here at the City of Manchester Stadium, built for the Commonwealth Games in 2002 and taken over by the club soon after. But by moving here so recently, they've detached themselves from a long history of a club that wasn't always so grand. Now what traces of that history are left behind today? I'm going to be looking at that right now, and our first stop isn't so far away. So I'm on Clue Street in West Gorton. Now this patch of land behind me where they're building these houses, there used to be a church called St Mark's Church. Now that is the birthplace of Manchester City Football Club. So West Gorton is a suburb of East Manchester, a couple of miles from the city centre on the road to Hyde. In the late 19th century this was a very residential area, with row upon row of red brick terraced houses, railway sidings and engineering works. Now around this time Manchester was plagued by gangs of marauding teenage boys known as scuttlers, fighting each other quite violently over territories and personal grudges. There was also high unemployment across the city at the time, particularly in the poorer eastern side. To try and stop some of the local men from getting into crime and alcoholism, Rector Arthur Connell from St Mark's was keen to get involved. In 1880, two church wardens, William Beestow and Thomas Goodby here, started a football team named after the church itself. Now what we don't know unfortunately is where St Mark's played the very first games. We do know it was a patch of wasteland not far from the church, and some people reckon it was here off Thomas Street where this complex is behind me. Now although we can't be certain where St Mark's played that first season, it's interesting to note that this complex over there used to be occupied by Fujitsu, who moved to and currently have offices in Newton Heath, where Manchester United's very first ground used to be. Now it's spooky little things like that that keep the histories of both Manchester teams very closely intertwined, much more than both sets of fans care to admit. So for the second season St Mark's came here. I'm just on the opposite side of Hyde Road now, on somewhere called Redgate Lane, which is where Kirkmanshire Cricket Club used to be. Now today this is occupied by just another busy A road and a large car auction site over here at Bellevue. But back then there would have been plenty of open green land around here, certainly much more than in other industrial parts of the city. So after just one season here, St Mark's had to move again, the cricket club complaining that they'd ruined the pitch. So for the third season running, the club had to find a new home, which was here in Gorton Park. Now I used to work around here for a number of years, and I must have been in this park about 100 times. So it's really interesting for me to discover that St Mark's played games here, attracting hundreds or even thousands of people. Now we're less than a mile from Clue Street in West Gorton, but it already feels like the club have left something of their origins behind. It was while they were here that St Mark's merged with another local team, Bellevue, but they split after only one season. And in 1884, after 2 seasons playing here, St Mark's moved on and renamed themselves Gorton AFC. Now I'm on Pink Bank Lane in Gorton. Over here I've got St Peter's High School and Bellevue Leisure Centre over this side. But back in 1884 all this was just wasteland, but the club were desperate. They needed somewhere to play football, so they took it. Unfortunately after just one season the pitch was just unsuitable and they had to move on yet again. So I'm just off Reddish Lane now, on the very edge of Gorton. I'm actually walking on what would have been the Stockport branch canal, and altogether I'm about 2 miles now from St Mark's Church. Those houses behind me is Broadfield Road, but before they were built this was all just open land, owned by the Bull's Head pub on the main road over there. So the landlord of the Bull's Head charged Gorton £6 a year for the rent, so they stayed for 2 years. Now, whether he thought he'd make more money on match days behind the bar, or whether he thought Gorton were being a bit too stingy with the money, but after those initial 2 years, he raised the rent. Gorton refused to pay, and so they had to move on again. Okay, so let me show you a side-by-side map. The left-hand side of your screen is a map from 1888, and we've got Hyde Road running right down here from the city centre. Blue Street runs off that, and this black building right here is St Mark's Church, no longer there unfortunately. Now, I was filming just off Thomas Street, where this ironworks used to be, and it's believed that the first season St Mark's played home games on one of these bits of land around here. Nobody really knows where. For the second season, they crossed Hyde Road, right down here to Kirkmanshulme Lane, not very far away, to, well, we've got the cricket ground here. It's believed they played the second season here on where it says football ground. I was filming right about here on Redgate Lane, right about this footpath next to the ground. Now for the third and fourth season, they moved to Gorton Park, which is of course still there. And then the fifth season, back down to Kirkmanshulme Lane, a stone's throw away, and I was filming right here on Pink Bank Lane. Now you can see on the left hand side of the screen, this is open land, wasteland or greenland. It isn't explicitly clear, but what we do know, it wasn't very suitable for football, so it's probably not this purpose-built football ground right here where they played. Now after only one season, we're going to have to zoom out to show you where they went next, and we're going to travel all the way across Gorton to the other side. We're going to land over here near Gorton Cemetery, the Stockport branch canal, and we're just inside the county boundary of Stockport, and here it is, the Bull's Head Inn. Now they played another 2 years on this land around here, and I was filming on the old Stockport branch canal, and then finally we're going to zoom back out, travel all the way back to St Mark's Church right here, and then we're going to travel a little bit further. And what have we got here? A football ground. What's that doing there? Off Bennett Street, next to a foundry, a boiler works, and plenty of railway lines. It's a purpose-built football ground, and that's the next place I'm going to show you. Now, just 8 years after formation, the club found their 6th home ground here on Bennett Street in West Gorton, the closest they've been to St Mark's since the very beginning. Now, as you can see, I'm stood next to a railway line. Now, that was there originally, but where the freight terminal is today, that was just open wasteland, probably a bit unsuitable for a football pitch. Nevertheless, determined to put some roots down somewhere, Gorton leased the land off the railway company and started building their first proper stadium. Now in 1887 the club changed their name again, this time to Ardwick. They improved the pitch here, built the first proper stand, but there's still nowhere for the players to change. They had to get ready for the match at a pub down the road called the Hyde Road Hotel, which is unfortunately no longer there. Ardwick were admitted to the Football League in 1892, joining the second division. 2 years later the club finished 13th out of 15 and slipped into financial difficulties. Like local neighbours Newton Heath, issues with rebuilding at the ground led to instability and the threat of collapse. In April 1894 the club decided it needed a fresh start to stand out more from the other local Manchester teams. Now back then there were quite a few football teams from the local area playing on a similar level, and Ardwick decided to cash in on the boom in popularity of football and stake a claim to a name. Once again, the club decided to change their name and Manchester City was born.
By 1904, the ground had developed into a 40,000 capacity venue,
and star winger Billy Meredith, one of the greatest players of his era, helped the team to their first FA Cup triumph. A year later, Meredith was at the centre of a huge scandal, accused by Aston Villa captain Alec Leakey of offering £10 for Villa to throw the game, thereby letting City win the league on the final day of the season. Meredith was found guilty, fined and banned for a year. City refused to offer him any money during this period, and feeling betrayed, Meredith went public about the club overpaying players' wages. Well, you see, the Football League had imposed a £4 a week cap on all wages, which City were regularly breaking. When the club's finances were investigated more thoroughly, it was concluded that City were guilty. Many of their players were banned for a short period and fined. A powerful number of them, including Meredith, were snapped up by Manchester United and started playing their home games just a couple of miles up the road at Bank Street, over Manchester's Reds. In 1910, a roof was added to the Hyde Road Stadium, providing cover for 35,000 spectators, but the stadium remained a disjointed, haphazard place. The problem was with the narrow surrounding streets and the low number of turnstiles. Attending a game here was difficult and uncomfortable to say the least.
Now, in a 1913 cup tie against Sunderland, an attendance of 41,000 people was taken. Now, they closed the gates an hour before kick-off, but more and more people continued to push into the ground. By the time the game started, there were that many people that they were spilling onto the pitch. Now, in the 58th minute when Sunderland scored, the crowd got so wild and out of hand that the referee just had to abandon the game entirely. In 1920, a fire caused by a cigarette end destroyed the main stand, and City made up their mind to find a new home. Now, they made inquiries with Manchester United at Old Trafford about sharing the ground there, but neither club could agree on a rent price. And so City struggled on here at Bennett Street till 1923, when a venue in Moss Side was finally found. After more than 4 decades bobbing around the Hardwick and Gorton areas, Manchester City decided to up sticks and move to South Manchester to start a new life and a new legacy.
Okay, so very quickly back to the map. The left hand side of the screen is a map from just before the First World War, so it's about 10 years out of date by the time City left Hyde Road. Where my cursor is the Hyde Road Stadium. The city centre's up here, then you go due south all the way to the edge of the urban sprawl, to the edge of the Greenland here, and we get to this patch here which is Moss Side. Look at all the terraced houses there, very highly populated area. There's a little patch here though which is empty, and that says Moss Side Brickworks, and that's the land that City acquired in 1923 and began building their first proper stadium, named after the road it was on, Main Road. The decision to move out of East Manchester was a contentious one and upset local fans, many of whom could no longer afford to travel across town to the games. Nevertheless, the south and west of the city had the better opportunities for long-term growth, and the club went ahead with the move. Interestingly, it was Ernest Magnol, former manager of Manchester United and now manager of City, who encouraged the club to accept the Moss Side site. He'd also encouraged United to move to Old Trafford in a similar fashion some 15 years earlier. 59,000 fans gathered here to watch City's first game, a 2-1 win over Sheffield United. The capacity of the stadium was almost 90,000, in the days before all-seater venues of course, and the second highest attendance in an English football game was recorded when 84,000 spectators saw City beat Stoke in the 6th round of the FA Cup.
So Main Road would go on to become City's spiritual home. Over the years it'd seen many highs and lows. In 1937, for example, they won their first league championship. But after the Second World War, due to bomb damage at Old Trafford, Manchester United were forced to share the stadium here with their rivals. City's time here was sometimes difficult, but it's here at Main Road where much of the tradition of the club was created. For example, the streets around here are synonymous with the club itself: Kippax Street, Platt Lane and Main Road. And the players that played during these years are still recognised as some of the best in the club's history. For example, Franny Lee, Mike Summerby and Colin Bell. So the club moved into the City of Manchester Stadium in 2003 and Main Road was demolished. In its place now are new houses, new streets and a rejuvenated Moss Side looking towards the future.
So the move here was actually very fitting. Not only did East Manchester get a football team back, but we're only a couple of miles from Hyde Road, where their old ground used to be, as well as St Mark's Church. In essence, City moving here was City coming home. In 2008, the club underwent a rapid transformation from the inside out, after being bought by an investment company owned by Mansour bin Zayed Al Nahyan, a member of the royal family of the United Arab Emirates and one of the richest men in the whole world. Mansour would spend over £1 billion over the next few years, installing new management and world-class players in the search for success. Now, whatever the long-term consequences of the takeover, one thing was clear: Manchester City were a changed club and a new era of unprecedented success now unfolded. In 2011 they won the FA Cup, and then a year later the Premier League, in a thrilling finale here at the City of Manchester Stadium. So that's it for the lost history of Manchester City Football Club. We've seen how they've come from a small church football team struggling to find a home in Gorton and Ardwick and even Stockport, to being the richest club in the world, pushing for the highest of footballing honours. Now, interestingly, the stadium here is only half a mile from where Manchester United's former ground used to be, at Bank Street in Clayton. And it's little things like that that keep popping up when you look into the history of both clubs. It was former City player Matt Busby who had managed Manchester United after the Second World War, and who would lead a highly talented team of young men almost to European glory. Now, that ended tragically in 1958 in the Munich air disaster. But also there was a former City player on that plane who died that day, Frank Swift, who was a reporter at the time. Now, this is just one example of the common ground lying between these two bitter rivals. Like it or not, both clubs' histories are woven together in the same fabric, some colours shining more brightly at times than others, but still. Now, when you think about it, at the end of the 19th century and at the start of the 20th century, travelling about was a lot more difficult and more expensive for people back then. So fans from East Manchester, where both these clubs are originated from, would often see both teams if they could, even if they just claimed to support one of them. That's how important football was to this city. Football rivalries and banter are one thing, but I've always been quite surprised at how bitter and spiteful everyone can get about it. And if you think about it, every city in the world with more than one football team has its rivalries. It's natural, I suppose. But after looking into the history of both the Reds and the Blues here, I'm starting to think that perhaps this city, Manchester, could do it different.